I will shoot your sick fucking mouth right off your face!
True Detective Night Country Season 4, Episodes 4 through 6. Okay, the season finished. It fucking sucked. That was rough. There, I said it. Stick around to the end to find out what I think sucked big time, but first, let's rewind and be kind. Good things about the show. Representing the indigenous, that's always good, even though the concepts of fighting the power as an indigenous person is pretty well-worn cliche these days in cinema history. Representation is always good, so kudos. Can't complain about that. Listening to the official HBO podcast, I can tell the sincerity of the writer and the production team to respect the culture and even share the idea of the real sufferings of the Alaskan indigenous community, particularly with young women. Interestingly, the disappearance of young women in the indigenous community in Alaska is common, which is very, very sad. I did not know that. And part of me feels like that story in and of itself would have been much more interesting to watch than this one. As one person wrote in the comments, it's called True Detective. All I can say is that there better be a huge fucking injection of true in the next episode, because this voodoo bullshit is really, really dumb. So I found that very funny, so let's get to the bad stuff. Basically, the biggest issue to me is there's an imbalance of themes. Every storyline ultimately connects in the end. Fine. Everything ties up relatively neatly. Storylines more or less resolve. Great. But the viewer's expectations by, let's say, I don't know, episode 2, 3, are suddenly incongruent with how the story pivots to a more prominent storyline. And that prominent storyline goes into this focus on the psychological, kind of horror aspect. The ghosts, the hauntings deep inside Navarro, and the history of mental health issues with her sister, and the majority of the mid-season just seems to be kind of leaning into that storyline, at least spending a lot of screen time on it. So we get a very imbalanced exposure to the rest of the story. The murder mystery is in the back seat compared to this dark spiritual struggle of Navarro and even Danvers to an extent. So the actual detective and crime mystery plays a relatively small part in the overall story. By the time we get to episode 6, the finale, it just feels like we're just rushing through to tie all these loose ends together. I think this is in part an issue with the 6-episode format. So maybe it would have worked a little better by spreading out all that ghost shit throughout the 10 episodes and keeping the focus more on trying to solve the crime, having more of that feel like it's happening throughout the season. I don't know. Feels like it would have sucked either way. It just feels like constantly throwing in the horror stuff. We can categorize it as horror stuff. It was just cheap movie making tricks to, have people scared for no reason. Next issue, this is debatable if it's an issue, is that there's no clear bad guy that we could follow through the season, or antagonistic force, let's just say. But obviously the point of the show is the complexity of the social dynamics, so thematically it wasn't supposed to be let's chase a serial killer in the shadows kind of season, which is fine. But the problem is that was kind of suggested from the very first episode. Someone or something is out there doing some weird shit. That to me seems to be a big component of the True Detective franchise. So that's kind of another incongruence in my mind. And we have an expectation, some kind of setup, but when it's playing out, we're not really getting the satisfaction of trying to find out who did it. Or at least the finding out of the whodunit is just quietly happening in the background. We don't even really care because it feels like there's no stakes involved. Even everybody in the town doesn't really care about this weird crime. Why do we care? I mean, if you want to focus on the dynamics of the town, then just focus on the dynamics of the town. Build a story around that. Help us really get invested in the people of the town and the issues. By the time you put in all the psycho horror stuff in there and all those scenes of, pensive misery of Navarro and Danvers' inner psyche, the story overall is just diluted. We're just watching people be miserable most of the time. Basically, all that stuff to me is filler material. Sure, they wanted to bring to light the spirituality, the indigenous people, but using so much screen time to focus on filler material, to me, it's not a great move because we just forget as an audience that there's even a crime happening. Okay, now what sealed the deal for me is this Greek tragedy-esque scene, or should I say, scene from a soap opera.
Your son loves you. He loves you. He doesn't want to see you do anything fucked up, okay?
Hey! What's going on?
Come on, let's get him into my truck.
Pryor, don't.
Okay, the fact that Pryor just kind of strolls in, cool as a cucumber, when he hears his dad arguing and then firing shots off in the living room. What in the heavenly fuck? I mean, Wouldn't he be just like a little bit more surprised in demeanor when he comes into the living room? Anyways, before I really share my thoughts, let's listen to the podcast. Let's hear what Issa has to say about the process of creating that scene.
How was I going to pull the trick of getting Pryor to pull that trigger in a believable way? And that took a lot of work. I wrote it like 4 times, and then Chris Mundy, who was working with me at that point, came, and we were in a room together just throwing ideas at each other forever. I know Pryor has to kill him, but it was not believable. Chris took it and wrote the scene, and he wrote a really good first template of this new incarnation of the scene, and I sent it out to the actors. But we sat together on a Saturday afternoon in Reykjavik, me and Finn Bennett, who plays Pryor, and Jody and Kaylee, and all of us started to spitball and stand up and play with it. And then finally we threw lines out until it was the bare minimum, and we ended up with a version that really worked for us.
So basically they were forcing the character to do something that wasn't believable in the first place. The question is, but why wasn't it believable? Here's why I think it's not believable. Please be patient. Follow along with me on this tangent. Robert McKee is the OG screenwriting story master. His book Story is the industry standard for screenplay writing. And I've read it many times. It's a book I still refer to this day. And here's what he has to say about writing turning point scenes where the characters have to make a choice. A turning point is centered in the choice a character makes under pressure to take one action or another in the pursuit of desire. Human nature dictates that each of us will always choose the good or the right as we perceive the good or the right. It is impossible to do otherwise. Therefore, if a character is put into a situation where he must choose between a clear good versus a clear evil, or a right versus wrong, the audience, understanding the character's point of view, will know in advance how the character will choose. So we know Pryor, deep inside, is a good person who on a given day probably wouldn't want to gun down his own father. We can assume that much. Okay, so now people may disagree with me on this. Fine, tell me in the comments. Nothing in the season foreshadowed that Pete was capable of gunning his father down. Yes, he got pissed at him a couple times. Yes, he's suffered some abuse from him when he was younger. He's got a grudge towards him. Fine. Yes, he definitely acted in defense, and it was a charged situation. But he's a man of the law, and at his core, he's a highly intelligent and thoughtful person. Back to what McKee says here. Therefore, if a character is put into a situation where he's got to make this difficult choice, the audience understands the character's point of view. We will know in advance how the character will choose. So we know Pryor's point of view already, deep inside. I'm the audience. I know in advance how he's going to choose. He's going to protect and act in defense to what he thinks is right. But does defense mean killing his father? What the writing team is suggesting is that it was kind of an accident stemming from a hyper-emotionally charged scenario. But let's be real though, people. Let's be real. Wouldn't he be remotely capable of disarming him without having to actually kill him so quickly? Wouldn't it be highly probable that he'd shoot him in, I don't know, a non-fatal part of his body? Or is he just a terrible shot? He's fucking 5 feet away from him. He just shoots him in the head, point blank. So it wasn't an accident? He just told himself in a split second, yeah, I should just kill my dad. I mean, come on. Does every shot from a cop automatically turn into a kill shot? Apparently in movies and TV, it conveniently does when you need to conveniently make something happen in a plot. If the conception of the scene from the get-go is unbelievable, no matter what the shit is that you try to do, the scenario is still unbelievable because it's not true to the character's point of view unless it was a coincidental accident that he gunned him down. So it's kind of murky there. But basically for me, I felt on deep subconscious level the moment I saw that scene unfold, immediately I just laughed out loud like how preposterous this turn of events was. I could just smell the BS a mile away. Anyways, that's all I got. Tell me what you thought in your comments. Thanks again for joining me on this journey. Please let me know any other shows that are interesting out there that you'd like me to break down. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.